My name is Michael Davis. I founded a company that grew to $10 million in 5 years. I created the technology that made us leaders in logistics. But my partner, Steve Carter, stole everything. He forged documents, kicked me out of the company, and claimed my work as his own. He thought I'd break, but he didn't know I'd come back and ruin him in front of everyone. That day, I was sitting in my office finishing an update for our system. Suddenly, Steve walked in with a lawyer. He tossed a folder on my desk and said, "Michael, you're no longer part of the company. We voted to terminate you. You're too slow. We need progress." I couldn't believe my ears. I had poured 5 years of my life into this company. I packed my things into a box and left. Employees looked away as I walked down the hall. In that moment, I lost everything. But that was just the beginning. It all started 5 years ago. Steve and I were friends since high school. I was the tech guy. I loved coding, systems, optimization. Steve was the talker. He knew how to sell an idea. We decided to start a logistics company. I called it LogiStream. Our goal was simple: create a system that optimized deliveries for companies, cutting time and costs. I built the core of the system, an algorithm that analyzed routes, predicted delays, and found the best delivery paths. It was my baby. I worked on it night after night, skipping sleep to make it perfect. Steve handles sales and marketing. He brought in our first clients, and our company started to grow. Within 3 years, LogiStream became an industry leader. We served 50 major clients, including international companies. Our system saved them millions of dollars. By the 5th year, the company was worth $10 million, and we had a 50-50 split. I thought Steve and I were the perfect team. But I was wrong. Steve started to change. He kept talking about selling the company, about big money. I wanted to keep growing LogiStream, make it even better. But Steve saw me as an obstacle. He wanted fame, money, and total control. And he decided to get rid of me. When Steve told me I was fired, I was in shock. I had given everything to this company, 5 years of my life, sleepless nights, my passion. But that wasn't the worst part. A week later, I found out Steve had forged documents to remove me as a co-founder. He claimed I sold my share for $50,000, a laughable amount for a company worth $10 million. I never signed that contract. My signature was faked. Steve used his charm to convince the board I was holding the company back. He told them I couldn't keep up, that I was slowing progress. They believed him because he always knew how to talk. And me? I was just the tech guy who did the work. Steve didn't just fire me. He took my system, my work, my dream. He started presenting it as his own creation. He went to conferences, gave interviews, posed for magazines. Headlines read, "Steve Carter, logistics genius." And I was left with nothing. My reputation was ruined. People in the industry started whispering that I couldn't handle it, that I gave up. But they didn't know the whole truth. I could have given up. My life was destroyed. I had no money, no job, no company. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let Steve win. I knew LogiStream better than anyone. I knew its weaknesses, its code, its secrets. And I decided to use that to take back what was mine. I started from scratch. I had nothing but my laptop and my experience. I decided to build a new system, a better version of LogiStream. I called it OptiFlow. I worked day and night, improving the algorithms, adding features that the old system didn't have. I knew I could do better, but building a new system was only part of the plan. I needed proof that Steve stole my share. I reached out to Emily, our former office manager. She quit LogiStream a month after I left. She said she couldn't stand watching Steve lie. Emily handed me a USB drive and whispered, "Michael, I found this in the old archives, Steve's emails with the lawyer. He was planning to kick you out a year before it happened. Here's the proof." I opened the files. There were emails between Steve and the lawyer. He wrote, "Michael knows too much. We need to remove him as a co-founder. Forge the contract." This was exactly what I needed. Emails, proof of forgery, even recordings of Steve bragging about how he got rid of me. But I knew just suing him would be too easy. I wanted Steve to lose everything, like I did. And I knew when to strike. Steve was preparing for the biggest deal of his life. He planned to raise $20 million from investors and sell LogiStream for $50 million. He was set to give a presentation at a major conference, streamed live to thousands. That was my chance. I spent the next 6 months building OptiFlow in silence. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my friends, not my family, not even Emily. I rented a small apartment and turned it into my workspace. My days were filled with coding, testing, and refining. I added features to OptiFlow that LogiStream could never dream of. Real-time traffic prediction, AI-driven cost optimization, even a module for eco-friendly delivery routes. I knew the logistics industry was hungry for innovation, and I was going to give it to them. But I wasn't just building a product, I was building a weapon. While I worked on OptiFlow, I kept digging into the evidence Emily gave me. The emails were a gold mine. Steve had been planning my ouster for over a year. He'd written to the lawyer, "Once Michael's gone, I can take full credit for the system. No one will question it." Another email revealed his plan to sell the company after raising the $20 million. He wrote, "We'll cash out at $50 million and I'll be set for life." Every word I read fueled my determination. Steve wasn't just greedy, he was ruthless. He didn't care about the company, the employees, or the clients. He only cared about himself. I also found recordings of Steve bragging to his buddies at a bar. Emily had somehow gotten her hands on them through a mutual contact. In one recording, Steve laughed and said, "Michael was so clueless. He thought we were equals. I got rid of him for peanuts, and now I'm the face of LogiStream." Hearing his voice, his arrogance, made my blood boil. But I stayed calm. I knew I had to play this smart. My first step was to get OptiFlow off the ground. I reached out to a small logistics company I'd worked with years ago, a client Steve never bothered with because they were too small. I pitched OptiFlow to their CEO, a guy named Tom Reynolds. I showed him how my system could cut their delivery times by 30% and save them $200,000 a year. Tom was skeptical at first. He'd heard about my exit from LogiStream and the rumors Steve had spread, but I let the product speak for itself. After a 2-week trial, Tom was sold. He signed a contract with me on the spot and even offered to introduce me to other clients. Word started to spread. Within 3 months, I had 5 clients using OptiFlow. They were small companies, but they were loyal, and their feedback helped me make the system even better. I wasn't making millions yet, but I was building something real, something Steve couldn't take away. Still, I kept my success quiet. I didn't want Steve to know what I was up to. Not yet. While OptiFlow grew, I kept an eye on Steve. He was riding high. LogiStream was getting more press than ever. Steve was on the cover of a major tech magazine, smiling with a headline that read, "The Future of Logistics, Steve Carter's Vision." Every time I saw his face, I felt a mix of anger and motivation. He was living the life I should have had, but I knew his time was coming. The conference was the key. It was called TechLog Summit, one of the biggest events in the logistics industry. Steve was set to be the keynote speaker, presenting LogiStream to a room full of investors, industry leaders, and media. The event would be streamed live to thousands of viewers online. He was planning to announce the $20 million investment and his vision to sell the company for $50 million. It was his moment of glory, and it was going to be his downfall. I spent weeks preparing. I reached out to a few of Steve's investors through back channels, using a fake name. I planted seeds of doubt, sending them anonymous tips about irregularities in LogiStream's ownership history. I didn't reveal too much, just enough to make them curious. One investor, a sharp woman named Karen Brooks, started asking questions. She emailed Steve asking for clarification on the company's founding documents. Steve brushed her off, but I could tell he was nervous. His replies were short, defensive. He didn't know someone was watching his every move. I also got in touch with a tech journalist named Brian Harper, who had covered LogiStream in the past. I sent him a cryptic message. "You might want to be at the TechLog Summit. There's a story about LogiStream you won't want to miss." Brian was intrigued. He agreed to attend the conference and bring a camera crew. Everything was falling into place. The night before the conference, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, going over my plan one last time. I had a USB drive with all the evidence, the forged contract, Steve's emails, the recordings of him bragging. I also had a demo of OptiFlow ready to go. I wasn't just going to expose Steve, I was going to show the world what I was capable of. I looked at a photo of me and Steve from our first year at LogiStream, smiling with a sign that said, LogiStream, Year 1. I tore the photo in half and whispered to myself, this ends tomorrow. The day of the conference arrived. I put on a suit, grabbed my laptop, and drove to the venue. My heart was pounding, but I felt a strange calm. I had waited 6 months for this moment, and I was ready. The conference hall was packed with hundreds of people, investors in suits, industry leaders taking notes, cameras set up for the live stream. Steve was on stage, looking as confident as ever. He was in the middle of his presentation, showing off LogiStream's features. My features. He said, LogiStream is the future of logistics. I built this system from the ground up, and it's why we're the best in the industry. Today, I'm proud to announce a $20 million investment that will take us to the next level, and soon will be valued at $50 million. The crowd clapped. Steve basked in the applause, smiling like he owned the world. But then I stood up from the back of the room. I raised my hand and said, Excuse me, Steve, I have a question. The room went silent. Steve's smile faltered. He squinted, trying to see who I was. When he realized it was me, his face turned pale. Michael, what are you doing here? I walked to the front of the room, holding my laptop. The cameras turned to me, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room and thousands watching online focused on me. I'm here to set the record straight. You didn't build LogiStream. I did. And I have proof that you stole my share of the company. The crowd murmured. Steve laughed nervously and said, That's ridiculous. Michael, you're embarrassing yourself. Sit down. But I didn't sit down. I plugged my laptop into the projector and opened the first file, the forged contract. I turned to the audience and said, This is a contract Steve claims I signed, selling my 50% share of LogiStream for $50,000, but I never signed it. My signature was forged, and here's the proof. I showed the emails between Steve and his lawyer. The screen displayed Steve's words. Michael knows too much. We need to remove him as a co-founder. Forge the contract. The crowd gasped. Steve's face turned red. He shouted, This is a lie. He's making this up. But I wasn't done. I played the recording of Steve at the bar, laughing as he said, Michael was so clueless. I got rid of him for peanuts, and now I'm the face of LogiStream. The room erupted in whispers. Investors started shifting in their seats, looking at Steve with suspicion. Karen Brooks, the investor who'd been asking questions, stood up and said, Steve, is this true? Did you forge documents to steal Michael's share? Steve stammered, No, I can explain. But I cut him off. There's more. Steve's been lying to you about the system. LogiStream was my creation, every line of code, and I've built something even better. I opened the demo of OptiFlow and showed the audience its features. I explained how it was faster, smarter, and more efficient than LogiStream. I said, I've already signed contracts with 5 companies, and they're seeing results LogiStream could never deliver. If you're looking for the future of logistics, it's not with Steve, it's with me. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Soon the applause grew louder. Investors were nodding, taking notes. Steve looked like he was about to collapse. He shouted, This is a setup! Security, get him out of here! But it was too late. Brian Harper, the journalist, was already filming everything. The live stream chat was exploding with comments. Steve's a fraud. Michael's the real genius. Karen Brooks and several other investors stood up and walked out, shaking their heads. The $20 million deal was falling apart in real time. Steve's presentation was over. He left the stage, his head down, avoiding the cameras. I stayed and answered questions from the audience. By the end of the day, 3 investors approached me about OptiFlow. They wanted to invest $25 million to help me grow. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew I'd accept. In the weeks that followed, Steve's world collapsed. The investors pulled out completely, and LogiStream's valuation plummeted. Clients started leaving, switching to OptiFlow. Steve faced lawsuits from shareholders for fraud. Last I heard, the company went bankrupt, and Steve was drowning in legal fees. He lost everything. His money, his reputation, his dream, his... As for me, OptiFlow became the new leader in logistics. With the $25 million investment, I expanded the company, hiring a team I trusted. We signed contracts with 20 major clients in the first year, and our valuation hit $30 million. I was a millionaire, but more importantly, I had my dignity back. My story went viral. People called me the logistics underdog who took down a fraud. I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the truth. I saw Steve one last time, months later, at a coffee shop. He looked broken, wearing a cheap jacket, sipping a coffee alone. He saw me and looked away, ashamed. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I had already won. After the conference, I didn't celebrate right away. I drove home, sat on my couch, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But I also felt something else, a quiet determination to make sure OptiFlow wasn't just a tool for revenge. I wanted it to be a legacy, something that would outlast me, something Steve could never touch. I poured my energy into the company, working harder than I ever had at LogiStream. With the $25 million investment, I hired a team of engineers I trusted, people who shared my vision for innovation. We opened an office in San Francisco, a sleek space with glass walls and a view of the bay. Every morning, I walked in knowing this was mine, built from scratch with no lies, no betrayal. OptiFlow grew faster than I expected. The 3 investors who approached me at the conference became our biggest advocates. They introduced me to their networks, and soon we were signing contracts with major players in the logistics industry. One of our biggest wins was a deal with a global shipping company that had been a LogiStream client. They switched to OptiFlow after hearing my story, saying they couldn't trust Steve's leadership. By the end of the first year, we had 20 major clients, and our valuation soared to $30 million. I was a millionaire on paper, but the money wasn't what drove me. It was the knowledge that I'd built something honest, something real. Meanwhile, Steve's downfall was swift and brutal. After the conference, the live stream footage spread like wildfire. Clips of my presentation, the emails, and Steve's panicked reaction were all over social media. Hashtags like "Waletas LogiStream fraud" and "Oh, Michael Davis revenge" trended for days. Brian Harper, the journalist I'd tipped off, published a scathing article titled "The Fall of LogiStream, a Tale of Greed and Deception." It detailed everything: Steve's forgery, his lies, and how he'd stolen my work. The article was picked up by major outlets, and soon Steve's name was synonymous with corporate fraud. Investors didn't just pull out, they sued. They accused Steve of misrepresentation and demanded their money back. Shareholders followed, filing a class action lawsuit for fraud. LogiStream's clients started jumping ship, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Within 3 months, the company was bankrupt. Steve tried to save it by taking out loans, but no one would lend to him. He was toxic. Last I heard, he sold his fancy car and his condo to pay legal fees. He was a shell of the man who'd once been on magazine covers. I didn't follow Steve's every move. I didn't need to. But I got updates from Emily, who still had friends in the industry. She told me Steve had tried to start a new venture, a small consulting firm, but no one would work with him. His reputation was ruined. She also told me he'd been reaching out to mutual contacts, asking if I'd be willing to talk. He wanted to make things right, he said. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. A year after the conference, OptiFlow was thriving. We were named Logistics Startup of the Year at a major industry awards ceremony. I stood on stage accepting the award and gave a short speech. I thanked my team, my clients, and even Emily for her courage in helping me expose the truth. I didn't mention Steve. There was no need. Everyone in the room knew the story. As I walked off stage, a familiar face approached me. It was Karen Brooks, the investor who'd walked out on Steve at the conference. She smiled and said, "Michael, you've built something incredible. I'm glad I bet on the right horse. Karen wasn't the only one who'd come around. Several of Steve's former investors reached out, asking to invest in OptiFlow. I turned most of them down. I didn't need their money anymore. But I did take meetings with a few, just to hear them admit they'd been wrong to trust Steve. It wasn't about the money, it was about respect. One day, I got an unexpected email from Steve. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. In the email, he wrote, "Michael, I know I can't undo what I did. I was wrong. I let greed get the better of me. I've lost everything, and I deserve it. If there's any way I can make this right, please let me know." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't reply. Steve's apology was too little, too late. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. I'd already moved on. OptiFlow was my focus now, and I wasn't looking back. The final chapter of this story came a few months later. I was driving to a meeting when I stopped at a coffee shop. As I waited for my order, I saw Steve sitting at a corner table. He looked different. His designer suits were gone, replaced by a cheap jacket. He was sipping a coffee, staring at his phone, looking defeated. He glanced up and saw me. For a moment, our eyes met. He looked ashamed, quickly looking away. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I took my coffee, walked out, and drove to my meeting. That moment was my closure. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won. OptiFlow was worth $40 million by then, and I was building a legacy that would last. Steve was a footnote in my story, a reminder of what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves.